get started with announcements and introductions. So, hi everyone, welcome to Dark's first ever Bonfire chat. Since we might have some new people today, Dark or the Dark, whatever you prefer, because I switch the usage of it every time I use it, is the Discord academic research community. We strive to be an inclusive and supportive network for anyone researching Discord and Discord-related communities, platforms, or cultures. So this Bonfire Chat is going to be the first of our planned series of talks with key experts in various topics related to Discord. So Discord was actually originally going to be called Bonfire, so we thought we'd reference this in this cheeky way with our talk series. So I'm going to introduce the panelists now, but I want to encourage listeners to respond to questions and chat in our Bonfire chat text channel. So in the last 10 minutes of the panel, I'll move us to a general Q&A, and at that time, you can feel free to request to speak, and I or a moderator will call on you. So without further ado, our first panelist is Dr. Robin Kaplan, who is a researcher at Data and Society Research Institute and a founding member of the Platform Governance Research Network. She received her PhD from the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University and conducts research at the intersection of platform governance and media policy. Her research examines the impact of inter- and intra-organizational behavior on platform governance and content moderation. Our next panelist is Dr. Joseph Searing, who is a postdoctoral scholar in computer science at Stanford University and an affiliated fellow at the Yale Social Media Governance Initiative. His work focuses on the social and organizational dynamics of moderation systems on online social platforms, exploring ways in which users' self-governance behaviors can be strengthened. His work begins with empirical analyses to understand community behaviors and challenges, and he translates the resulting findings into the design and development of new systems. He's received awards for his papers at ACM Chi, CSEW, and Chi Play conferences, and was recently named one of the CCC/CRA Computing Innovation Fellows of 2021. Our next panelist is Sohyun Hwang, is a PhD student in the Media Technology and Society program at NorthWestern University. Using large-scale data and interview studies, her work focuses on how online communities use rules, tools, and design in unique ways to meet their needs, and what the development and implementation of varied governing routines across groups within shared social technical systems implies for online governance. Our last panelist, Zach Parker, is a moderation program manager at Discord, where he makes educational content, helps moderators on the platform, and builds relationships with academic partners. He is currently completing a PhD in communication at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, studying how communities heal and rebuild in the wake of terrorism. And finally, I am the moderator. I'm Hibby Thack, and I'm an incoming PhD student at the University of Michigan School of Information, woohoo. I'm studying algorithms, identity, content moderation, and digital cultures, mostly video games, online spaces, and queer and trans stuff. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and can we get a round of applause in the chat for our panelists? Woohoo! So to start off the panel, I want to ask the panelists, in a brief overview, what work are you currently doing around content moderation on Discord, or just content moderation in general? And feel free to just unmute, panelists.
I'm worried about us all trying to speak at the same time.
Oh, sure. Okay, Robin, you can go first.
Okay. Okay, so the work that I'm currently doing, I got a grant from Internet Society Foundations to look at how platforms verify people and objects and places. So I am currently doing a big kind of cross-platform approach. I do a lot of comparative work in my research, and so I'm not doing work on Discord specifically, but I did go down a giant rabbit hole to look at Discord's own history with verification and how it's implemented its verification program and the role that it plays and how it features various content on the site. So that's the extent to which of the research I'm doing on Discord right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. Let's call on Zach next.
All right. So in my more professional capacity, I'm working on educational initiatives, like Hibby mentioned. So that's things like office hour styles Q&As with moderators, book clubs, arranging talks, programming development for moderators, and some additional multimedia stuff. From a research perspective, I'm quite interested in community leadership, particularly when it pertains to mental health and well-being. This is a platform where you have a pretty wild pollination of different ages that are all interacting at the same time, and very young people, particularly those in crisis, will oftentimes confide in authority figures like moderators, conflating sometimes very good mod practice with being a good confidant. So I'm quite interested in sort of the recontextualization of both like relationships between mentors and mentees, as well as just how people understand themselves as community presences and leaders on this platform.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. And I see people in the chat being like, been there. So next up, let's have Soyun.
Yeah, I guess for the work that I'm doing around content moderation on Discord, I've just been working on a project the past few months, which is kind of my first foray into looking at Discord. And we're trying to understand how and why people decide to use the bots that they do in their servers. And this is an interview study. And we're asking questions like, what needs are people meeting? What new issues are they encountering when they adopt bots? Like, why are certain bots better for some servers versus others, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it's been a really cool experience listening to folks talk about how they configure the right selection of tools for their spaces. We're just ramping up our second round and probably final round of interviews. And I'm actually not a heavy Discord user, so it's been a great learning experience for me in more ways than one.
Nice, thank you. That sounds so cool. So excited to hear more about that in the future. So last up, Joseph.
Sure, yeah. I'm doing a couple of different directions in research right now. One is a big push into trust and safety education, looking at how moderators and also people at companies learn about trust and safety practices. And the other piece is looking specifically at on Discord right now at proactive moderation, meaning the things that moderators do to manage spaces, to cultivate them before things go wrong. So ideally, they don't have to moderate situations because they don't get out of hand in the first place.
Nice, thank you. And very quickly before we move on, I'm also doing some work on content moderation, not on Discord specifically, but I want to. I'm currently doing stuff on how users on marginalized users on Reddit and Twitch make content moderation visible and what that means for content moderation visibility overall. So thank you, panelists. So we will, throughout this, I want to encourage viewers, listeners to also throw questions in the chat. If I don't catch it, other people may answer you, but also PB is here as another moderator to help me catch questions. But the question I have next is, for all of you, how is content moderation on Discord similar to or different from other platforms?
Should we just follow the same order?
Oh, sure, yeah. We can do Robin, Zach, Soyun, and then Joseph.
Okay, so I haven't done research on Discord's moderation for a few years, I'll tell you. But I did do a big study in 2018 where I interviewed people who worked in trust and safety across 10 major platforms, and Discord was one of them. And as part of that, what I was really trying to understand was, how kind of the size and scale of the company was impacting how they kind of constructed their trust and safety teams. So I, in my interviews, basically settled on the fact that there was 3 main content moderation strategies, and they can overlap and they can happen across, like you can have multiple strategies being used by one platform. And the first is community reliant. So those are platforms like Reddit and Wikipedia that are relying on, a heavy amount of work from their volunteer community. The second was industrial, which are the big platforms like Facebook and YouTube, where they'll have a policy team and they'll have an enforcement team, and they're very separate. And the enforcement team could be kind of located geographically quite separate. They're often outsourcing it. They're boiling concepts down to very, very kind of clear rules in an effort to automate. And then the third category was what I called artisanal. And I called it that because that was like the term that the people who I was interviewing called it. And the people, and that included Discord. So at the time when I interviewed Discord, they had something like 4 to 10 people who were working on trust and safety for the platform. I'm sure that's grown now. And their approach was very individual. They looked at things on a case by case basis. They were all kind of existing in one room together. And they were doing actually a lot of proactive monitoring. And that's something that you don't even see among a lot of the other smaller companies, which is where they're going in and kind of looking at communities to see if they're violating guidelines.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. I'm actually kind of excited to hear if Zach has any comments on that, because I don't know if Zach knows about that team growing or not. So actually, maybe go with Zach next.
Sure. So I'm not on the trust and safety team, but I can safely say that there are way more of those buggers than 4 to 10 at this point. There is a pretty dedicated trust and safety section of Discord. I think I've personally found Robin's model from 2018 to be very useful in sort of understanding how platforms work and function. And what I would sort of add to that based off of my own experience is that Discord is sort of straddling all three in different ways. So you have moderators in actual communities who are sort of homegrown. They're doing work that's very, very close to their own communities, and they're quite attuned to the sensibilities of their communities. So this makes me think of things like Daphne Keller and Francis Fukuyama talking about like middleware, where they want or they discuss how content moderation could be closer to the sort of point of generation or point of origin as a way to resolve sort of like broader policy abuses or broader content abuses without having wide platform overreach. But at the same time, you do still have Discord doing quite a bit of content moderation on its own terms, and everything that is reported to Discord obviously gets passed both to Discord staff as well as to other moderators. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say there.
Thank you, Zach. I'll also say that I do love that study too, Robin. I've used it a lot in my current work too, so thank you for that. Next up, let's have Soyeon.
Yeah, I think maybe kind of just echoing what Zach and Robin have been saying. It's like the thing that seems most similar is this tension that we see between like the platform itself and what they're doing, and then what the communities and servers are doing. I think one of the things that are like so interesting for me about these kind of social media platforms or social computing platforms is that they are really just constituted by lots of unique groups, and all those groups are doing different things, but within the kind of like same constraints. So they're like sitting in parallel with one another. But one way that Discord seems to be different from the other places that I've looked at, which my other studies have looked at like Reddit and Wikipedia, which are very, very different, I think. And so like the most obvious way that Discord is different is that it's really a chat-based interface. And we know from both older and recent work that this interface really makes a huge difference in what kind of community dynamics we see, and also poses a lot of new interesting challenges that all platforms are probably concerned with, but with the kind of real-time need for dealing with content moderation on places like Discord, it's more pronounced, I think. And I think with the bot study in specific so far, I've been seeing a lot more blurrier lines about how people think about the boundary between like tools and technology versus what people are doing within that space.
Nice. Thank you so much. And then Joseph, do you have any thoughts on the question? Just a reminder, how is content moderation on Discord similar to or different from other platforms?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I just have a little bit to add to what's been said already. I think from the perspective of the volunteer moderators, it's a little different from other major platforms in a couple of ways. It's, I think, always on in a way that many of the others aren't. Well, of course, Reddit, things are happening on Reddit and in Facebook groups all the time. I think Discord is in an interesting mix between almost synchronous conversations and active 24 hours a day frequently in larger spaces that makes it a challenge often to moderate. But I think also that can lead to, I think, from what I've heard, maybe more burnout among volunteer moderators than on other platforms, which is something that maybe we can talk more about later on. I think Discord is also a really interesting example of this tool ecosystem, as Sohyun and others mentioned. The developer community for Discord bots is probably the most active developer community of any social platform that I can think of. And that really drives a lot of how the platform operates.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think talking about labor and like volunteer work is essential to talking about Discord. That actually I think goes into one of the questions that I had written down, and also to people in the chat. I'll throw in questions as we go. I think we'll do the formal Q&A at the end, but I will try to throw in questions as we go as well. But related to what Joseph just brought out, let's see, what was the question? It was yeah, so on platforms using these community reliant approaches that Robin talked about in her work to moderation like Discord, how should platforms deal with issues of unpaid and free labor, I guess, if anyone has any thoughts? And Robin, you can feel free to, or Joseph, you can go too, actually. I just saw you.
Yeah, I guess maybe I could just jump in. This is something that I've been looking at quite a lot. I had a paper published a couple of months ago in the Journal of Online Trust and Safety about Discord's relationship with volunteer moderators doing moderation during Pride Month last year, which I guess I'll probably revisit a bit in a couple of weeks. But I pushed a lot on this question of labor and the ethics of volunteer labor, free labor. And it was an interview study, and I spoke with a number of moderators, and I really pushed on this question. I asked a number of times, do you feel your labor is being taken advantage of, and various that question. And generally, the response was actually a strikingly strong no from almost all participants, and that's interesting for a variety of reasons. But I guess it centers for me the importance of drawing in our answers to that question first from the experiences of the people actually doing the work. I know it can be easy as academics to sort of armchair philosophize, but in talking about volunteer moderators, I think the first thing that we ought to do is to let volunteer moderators speak for themselves or to amplify their voices. So I guess I'll just start there.
Nice, thank you. Oh, Robin,
Yeah.
I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I that sounds like a great paper. I'm going to go read it right after this. That sounds amazing. Yeah, I think that's right. One thing that I learned in doing that work in 2018 was that every one of these models has pretty significant drawbacks. And from a labor perspective, you can compare the industrial platforms and the volunteer moderators, and the industrial moderators are being paid, but they are in an objectively terrible relationship with these companies, where they are being very taken advantage of and not treated well and not given the services that they need to do their job well. So I don't think that just giving payment is a way to kind of fix some of the ethics and labor concerns with doing this kind of work. And I do think that it's right that to be speaking with the community. One thing that I will emphasize is that we are all doing labor when we are existing on platforms. The watching we are doing, the clicking we're doing, the commenting, that is all labor that is creating value for these companies. And so I think that to some degree that we need to kind of consider volunteer moderating within that lens as well. But there's obviously huge drawbacks. Most of the studies that have come out about Reddit and Wikipedia have shown pretty clear gender and racial biases for years that came out of early adopters and who really had the time to dedicate to learning these new technologies at the outset, and how that has rippled throughout time. So, yeah, there's kind of clear concerns that can come out of it.
Thank you. Soyeon, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to echo what Robin was saying. I think what she said was really, really kind of like on the nose. It's entangled with a lot of other issues about volunteer work that happens in online spaces. And personally, I don't think I have like a very good answer to this or anything more to add. But maybe like one thing to think about is like, how do we think about value, and how do we perceive of that value as being recognized? Like, does it have to be about money, right? Like that's kind of baked into the question of asking about like unpaid labor, right? I think like a lot of the times we think about like value as associated with profit or some kind of like price for extracting like production in some way. But just some questions that I started thinking about as people were talking are like, does the experience of the community change for people and the people moderating it if they're making money from it? Like, does it become financialized and professionalized? And does that like inherently change it in an important way? Does it like continue to perpetuate different needs that don't match up with the original goals of the community? Is that what we really want? And maybe those are some of the reasons why that people who, care about communities are happy with, working to make those spaces valuable for themselves. And it's not about the money that we should be thinking about, but other things like how can we support them to create the spaces that they want, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice, thank you, Soyeon. Sorry, I saw two panelists unmute at the same time. But Zach, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So one angle that we haven't discussed too much is when the volunteer work steps out into being more directly promotional work. So one thing I'll add is that nobody should be moderating a server for a particular brand without being paid by that brand. I think that that's one distinction that I take very seriously, that if there's a LGBTQIA plus server that is in need of assistance and moderators volunteer to go help, I think that's absolutely amazing. If it is the server for like Budweiser or something, then those people that are doing that moderating work should be paid, because that is like labor that is directly proportional to like social media account management. So I did want to add that in. As far as the broader question, I really appreciate Joseph's point that the best thing you can do is just take the moderators seriously when they say how they feel about the work that they do. I think that that's sort of my guiding star with a lot of this work and a lot of how I think about moderation on Discord.
I'll just hop in briefly and add, I totally agree with what everyone else has said. And with regard to what Zach just said, I really do, I guess appreciate isn't the right word, but I think it's great the stance Discord has taken with regard to that piece about being paid. I think that's something that more platforms could follow. And generally, though, specifically, I wanted to highlight Robin's point. I think it's really important to talk about the ethics of these models comparatively. So rather than is a volunteer or community reliant approach ethical or not, what are the ethical questions compared to what other models might exist on the platform? So when you're talking about what moderation looks like on Discord compared to what it might look like on Discord in other versions, I think those other versions have to be discussed along with the ethics of the volunteer reliant model. I'm not sure if that made any sense, but it's not a.
No, that made sense.
Is it
Thank you,
ethical
man.
or not? It's a what is the alternative question.
Thank you. Really appreciate all of your thoughts. And I think this segues into something that Joseph had mentioned also about, I guess, scholars getting a sort of like, I forget what the word you use, sort of like soapbox sort of thing. So I guess what is something the audience and the panelists think scholarship on Discord and content moderation, either or combination of, often misses or needs to take into account?
I can start with mine, mostly because
Sure.
they're just a bunch of shout-outs. So personally, I just want to see more scholarship on Discord, period. And I'm personally very committed to aiding that in whatever way I can. So some examples of very high-quality scholarship I've seen that I think get at different points that I'd like to see researched further. You could talk about P.S. Berge's and Daniel Heslop's piece on distributed hate on Discord, because it maps Discord, the platform, and the third-party services that penetrate the platform at a bunch of different levels. So getting at all of the different integrations that are at work in making Discord functional at all for its users, I think helps capture a very important piece of the platform, because it's not just the platform, it's the platform and this extremely active bot ecosystem. Aaron Jong's lab is doing really cool work focusing on moderators and moderator self-perception that I find very, very fascinating, and I want to see so much more, just more people talking to moderators. And then also to shout out Dr. Searing, I found that Joseph's piece on the volunteer organization was extremely, extremely edifying for someone like me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Glad you like it. I have a couple of soapboxes about soapboxes. I'm not sure if that's
All the soapboxes,
meta.
all the armchairs, whatever we want.
Soapboxes all the way down. Two things that I would love to see studied more on Discord are, first, the experiences of kids, of teens. I think we don't get nearly enough work on specifically, moderation issues with regard to younger users. I don't know that I've ever seen an in-depth look at moderation on Roblox published, but Roblox is hugely important. There have been some pieces that looked at it sort of briefly in context of many other platforms. But many moderation scholars that I speak with don't even know what Roblox is, which I think it needs more visibility. So obviously Discord is connected to that, but there's a lot of younger users on Discord, and their experiences with content moderation matter a lot, both in what they're experiencing and also the moderation roles they're playing personally as moderators of spaces. Another one, which is quite a different direction, is studying adult content. There's, I think, quite a dearth of research in that direction for a variety of reasons, but it is an important and core part about how people engage online. And I think certainly it's part of the Discord ecosystem, and it deserves more study quite broadly, I think.
100% agree on the Roblox stuff. Robin, I see you just unmuted.
100% agree. Oh my God. I had the idea years and years ago to try and do a project on how kids kind of learn moderation efforts amongst each other. Because I was talking with my nieces, and they were like talking about an instance of cyberbullying on Roblox and how they were all kind of learning to identify what cyberbullying was and like all of it. So there's so much interesting work that can be done there. I'm a big proselytizer for platform governance research. I'm a co-founder for this new research network, the Platform Governance Research Network. So I think there's a lot of research that still needs to be done. I'd love to see more work beyond the big platforms, including, more work on Discord. I'd love to see more visibility for work being done by non-Western scholars in this area, because it's for some odd reason the field is still very skewed. I'd like to see more histories of these platforms, to see more people kind of contextualize how they came to be, why they kind of won out against competing apps. I'd like to see kind of more internal ethnographies of tech companies, but we're starting to see access kind of get cut off in various ways. So that's becoming more and more difficult. So that will take, some partnerships and opening up by platforms, which I'm not certain if they're willing to do. And I'd like to see, I'm doing some work, I've been for a long time doing some work on how kind of platforms engage external stakeholders. And I think I would love to do this work, but I don't know if I have time over the next couple of years, but there's a lot of really interesting work to be done on these little trust and safety advisory councils that have been popping up all over the place, and all these kind of newfangled ways of doing governance that that platforms are experimenting with.
Nice. Thank you so much, Robin. And then, Soyeon, just want to check in to see if you have any thoughts. Totally okay if not.
Yeah, no, I really agree with what everyone else has been saying, like all those more specific and alternative contexts that we just don't see a lot of work on. I think one that I've been thinking about a lot is non-Western/US online communities are super interesting, and there's so much stuff happening there, but there's almost no work on them because most of the scholarship are by English language speaking folks. But for example, I'm Korean, and I know that the online ecosystem in Korea is really, really fascinating. There's so much to learn from there. But more work kind of in that direction is something that I would love to do once my language skills get brushed up a little, but something that I think that we would all benefit from more broadly. And I think like one thing that I'm hearing across all these things is that it's like to our benefit, I think, to think more strategically about like the social processes that exist in and give rise to like more other or what's like different dynamics, the kind of iterative processes that we see over time, like the way that content moderation keeps evolving. Like I think a lot of content moderation work that we see in the news often talks about the technology and algorithm, et cetera. But there's a lot of stuff about people that get missed. And but I have a sense that everyone here is kind of like on the organizational, institutional people side of it.
Thank you so much, everyone. All of those ideas sound wonderful. I can't wait to see papers get published, presentations about those things. Yeah, thank you so much. So I do realize we're having a lot of questions pop up in the chat, so I am going to extend our Q&A to the last 20 minutes or so because I want to make sure we get to all of your questions. So I guess one question I have going forward before we get to that is, I guess, so we talked about the scholarship side. So I'm wondering what's one piece of advice any of you might give to Discord server moderators or Discord as a platform based on your research or experience?
I can go a little bit first, but I do want to
Sure.
for this question, given my own affiliations.
No, it's fair. I understand.
What I would say to my own employer, so brave of me, is Discord has lightning in a bottle. This platform has dedicated fans. It has thousands of people who love Discord and are actually dedicated fans of this platform, and the most active third-party developer ecosystem that I've ever seen for any platform. And I want to see Discord figuring out different ways to invest in those communities, to bring them actively into discussions with the company, not just sort of the platform capture angle of seeing what other entities are doing and then figuring out a way to like integrate it into the core platform, but instead bringing the people who are actually making those things and all that enthusiasm directly into Discord. I think it's a very different model of governance for a platform to actually shift who's making decisions for the business to the users in some way. And it'd be pretty radical, but I think that it's something that Discord is positioned to do that I want to see it do.
Agreed with PB in the chat. Any other thoughts from other panelists on, I guess, advice you would give moderators or just Discord as a platform itself?
I accidentally unmuted. I feel like I honestly don't do enough, and I'm not as enough of a power Discord user to be able to speak to what Discord moderators should or should not do. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, don't apologize. It's totally okay. Joseph, and then Soyeon.
So I think with regard to server moderators, the more I talk with moderators, the more impressed I am with how deeply they've thought about these things already in a lot of ways, particularly the moderators who've been around for a while. So I'm not sure whether I have quite the right, whether I have good advice to offer them that they may not have thought of already, but I guess that's part of the function of the Discord moderator ecosystem, is to kind of codify some of that experience and that wisdom and help educate newer moderators about it. I guess my advice for the platform, if I can be bold, is to be thinking about the division of responsibility and division of labor between volunteers and the company, and maybe what the proper role is for each. I know that there has been kind of historically this prioritization of user privacy in a lot of ways over aggressive large-scale platform behavior parsing. And that's a difficult balance to get right, but it's something that's important to keep revisiting.
Thank you. And to the panelists, audience, feel free to be bold. It's okay. We are here to discuss these things. So yeah, I saw you unmuted for a second.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I think I'm in the same boat as Robin and Joseph, where I am neither a power user of Discord, and I'm also very impressed by the folks that I've been speaking with about their experiences and kind of like how they think about their work as moderators. But also, thank you, Zach, for taking the hit of going first. One of the things is I did want to like echo what you said, because in my interviews, I think that's been coming up a lot. A lot of these folks who are, creating this really rich ecosystem of tools for the platform and learning to parse through all these third-party tools that other users have made, having more conversations with the platform to get better support for their bot development, for example, seems to be a really important point that keeps popping up in the interviews I'm having. We're in our second round of interviews, we're going to try to talk more about like what are the limitations of the ways that these the way that people are leveraging bots to satisfy the needs of their community servers and whatever. But that's been the main one so far, trying to figure out how to communicate with the platform more broadly about what they need in terms of support to create the spaces that they want.
Thank you so much.
Can I?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely.
Can
definitely
I invert the question just a little bit?
Yeah.
I think one thing that I think people from other platforms might learn from Discord or could benefit from looking at on Discord, there are two things. First is the Moderator Academy and kind of the surrounding ecosystem, because I know a lot of platforms are starting to get their feet wet in terms of moderator education. I think Discord has kind of a head start there in exploring what that might look like, or one path for that. And the other, as Sohyun has mentioned a couple of times, is this developer ecosystem on Discord. And I'd say enormous value that ecosystem has brought to the platform, in moderation and in a variety of other ways. Other platforms certainly do have developer ecosystems. Reddit does, Twitch does, but they're much less active. And I think it's an interesting thought exercise to think about what that might look like for Facebook groups, for example. Though I don't know that we're anywhere close to getting user tool integration on Facebook groups like there is on Discord.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up, and I think this can be our last question before we go to Q&A, but I actually wanted to ask, I guess related to that, what can Discord learn from content moderation on other platforms, and vice versa? What can other platforms learn from Discord?
I have a little thing building off of Joseph's last comment.
Oh, sure, no problem.
I think still relates to this. Which is, Discord begins with the Moderator Academy, but then very shortly thereafter you see Twitter and Facebook developing their own safety centers and safety educational materials. And I want to see that turn into a much more competitive space between these different companies, where they're all trying to outdo each other by providing more and more luxe and elaborate educational tools and resources for moderators and users. I think that'd be pretty cool. I'll also note, as far as answering the actual question, that earlier I'm blanking on who mentioned. I think it was Joseph who asked about that or mentioned this. That more work should be done in terms of the experience of kids and teens. Our user base tilts quite young, and like terms like groomer and stuff have lost all meaning. But young people do still need very well thought out protections when it comes to their time on Discord. As far as one thing that I would want anyone, especially Discord, to read, it's a bit of a weird pull, but if you have a chance and you like reading transparency reports, Pornhub actually has the single best transparency report I've ever read. It's really, really good, and it's extremely clear. And most importantly, it lists all of their partners, I think, in a way that kind of invites other companies to copy the homework and start working with those partners too, to curb things like child sex abuse material or NSFW or unsolicited NSFW content, which is pretty cool. And I want to see more work done in that terrain as well.
So interesting. I actually would not have expected that. So thank you for sharing that, Zach. Any other thoughts from the panelists going off of that, or like what Discord can learn from other platforms, what other platforms can learn from Discord? If not, it's okay. Oh, hi, Robin.
Hi, sorry guys. I'm very low energy today.
Oh no, it's okay.
I'm not jumping in. I think that one thing in the kind of comparative work that I was doing that I thought that the smaller, quote unquote, artisanal platforms were doing really well was outreach and education, not just of moderators, but of users. So you'd see kind of this direct one-to-one outreach when somebody would violate a rule, where they would reach out and explain why they had violated the rule. And that, even when I was looking at Discord a few years ago, when they were operating with a much, much thinner team, they were still able to do that direct outreach. And it was really, really impressive. The major platforms, you can often, the experience of being moderated is often, it feels like you're just dealing with an interface. You often don't know why or what rule you violated, or why, the company is not taking care of content that you feel violated its guidelines, and you're often given a lot of form responses, and that kind of one-to-one educational process I thought was really effective and really wonderful. I'd like to see it used more.
Thank you, Robin. And then, Soyeon, do you have any last thoughts?
Maybe just really quickly. I guess this is the study I'm doing right now is kind of my first study on Discord. I don't know if I'll have anything super substantive to say, but one of the things that people have been talking about in the chat is kind of like the really special role of the moderator academy on Discord, and kind of one way that Discord is really different is how it's been so open to engaging with the volunteer moderators and communicating with them in a way that we don't see a lot in other platforms. And it made me kind of think of, there's like the only place that I can think of that does that kind of interfacing, I guess, with the volunteers is like Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is a really special place, but it also does have a lot of problems. So maybe looking to the kind of dynamics that get reproduced in the scaled up volunteer work that we see on Wikipedia, and thinking about how that might play out on somewhere like Discord, which is obviously a very different environment, but still, an interesting online social computing platform. That might be something that I would kind of start thinking about, or something that I'm just starting to think about since people have brought it up.
Perfect. Thank you so much to our panelists. I think we're going to officially move to Q&A. So I think I talked to Mochaccino about speaking, but also if other people who ask questions don't feel comfortable speaking, I can also read your questions aloud. But now I will invite the audience to speak. So I'll send an invite to you, Mochaccino, if you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, guys. Hi, Bonfire.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the considerations you've raised so far. I asked a question ages and ages and ages ago that has a little less relevance now. I'm thinking about the definitional relationship between words like visibility and access and how you chose to render those terms in your research. And my bias here is that I do a lot of research in disability communities, particularly online. And I was wondering if, when you're thinking about big loaded phrases like visibility and access and moderation, what are you considering?
I can speak a little bit to considerations with the word moderation. I think in using the word moderation, I think I use the word moderation maybe more broadly than most to encompass a lot of activities that are kind of maybe more broad social cultivation. But I think part of that stems from the history of the usage of the word. This activity that we call moderation now had quite a lot of different names earlier on in the history of the social internet. The term moderator, as best I can figure, though it's kind of lost a bit in the haze of the history, comes from academic conference moderators, because a lot of the very early spaces online were spaces created by academics or people in tech were used to conferences as a social space where people gathered together to share ideas, and that was one of the models for the online space. So moderators of academic conferences have a very specific sort of perspective. There's a lot of history and assumptions baked into that term. Yes, I know I'm taking a bit of a sideways look at the term, but one of the points that's important to note related to that is the very gendered nature of the term, and specifically comparing the gendered nature of the term moderator or moderation with community manager, community management. And I think those jobs in practice overlap quite a lot, but we've chosen to focus on the term moderator for reasons that are interesting. So that's one perspective on the language. It wasn't quite exactly the question, but it's the first thing that popped into my head.
I'm not totally certain if this was a question that you were asking, but so I define moderation quite broadly, using terms, I'm sorry, such as like visibility. So any ways that a platform makes content more or less visible. So that can include, the removal of posts that violate things like community guidelines. And that can also include other ways that platforms incentivize the production of content. So that can mean anything like financial incentives. So I've done a lot of work on monetization and demonetization and how that factors into the kinds of content that's produced on a site like YouTube, and other ways that they are prioritizing through doing things like calculating what is considered high quality or not high quality. So that would influence, how accessible, how visible, how popular a type of content is on the site, and then that can have ripple effects in terms of the other types of content that is produced both by individuals and then organizations who are also trying to read these platforms to understand, what the companies like at any given moment. So I consider all of those within this broad kind of vein and genre of moderation.
I really, really like these answers so far. to just sort of, I organize my thoughts just around the two terms, so this isn't super responsive to what folks have said so far, but I think I'll come back around to maybe something that's more in conversation. Which is that I think of access in terms of like tiers, right? To use Discord as an example, you enter a space and then you're given a role that literally affords you different degrees of access. And when that happens, that's a point of exchange. It's not very neutral. It's indicative of how like a server meets its context in terms of who gets what kinds of access. I don't think that's a terribly new point, but I think it's useful to just note that like these things easily enter into Discord, and in fact the system runs basically by encoding them literally into how it functions. As far as visibility, to take a slightly different tack, I think about visibility in terms of like oh well, I've never said his last name out loud before. Mirzef, the Right to Look guy, and Simone Brown, where the division of gaze and gazed upon is profoundly constitutive of like how social dynamics work, right? Who gets to gaze, what that gaze does, what the force that's enacted by that surveillance looks like, matters quite a bit, and it can't be separated from its history. So when you move that into a platform space, I think hopefully this is connecting back maybe a little bit more. The things that give people different tiers of access when platforms literally encode like this set of users gets like a carte blanche to just break the rules because they are too important to like upset. That's where you can get into really important levels of like tiered access that influence how platforms function.
I have a paper on this. That demonetization paper is all about tiered governance and how platforms tier what rules apply to whom when.
I was talking about your paper because it's really good.
I was also just about to mention Robin has a paper about tiered governance.
Yes. All right. I think we'll move on to the next question. I believe it's from Trance. I think PB's been handling the like inviting people to talk, so I'll try it, but I think PB might do it before me. Okay, there we go. Hello.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you
Okay,
now.
just making sure. Hey, thank you everyone for hosting this. My question was, as far as like moderation styles go, there's like two big ones. Spirit of the rules versus moderating by the letter of the rules. And I was just curious what the panelists think of both, if there's any preferred styles, and if there's any other like in between styles or other styles that aren't these two main ones, and if there are communities that would benefit from one over the other. That's a lot of questions, so yeah, just answer however you would like.
One thing this makes me think of that might be kind of a fun sort of add to an already kind of fun, sprawling like an array of topics to think about is the kind of like technocratic turn that many platforms take when thinking about enforcing their rules, right? So you see like a company like Twitter that will enforce or set up an entire apparatus that is all of the rules that they say that people have to follow when they want to sort of justify a particularly controversial decision, right? So Twitter sets up like a 5-strike rule and then has to point out all the times post the 5-strike rule that like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Donald Trump like has broken or like incurred a strike in order to justify getting rid of them. So one thing I think that's very interesting is how platforms have turned to a very like letter of the law approach, because that's a way to sort of obtain or sort of maintain some degree of neutrality. I question the sort of like usefulness of the perceived neutrality there. Maybe I'm getting a little too wild here, but like the people that are going to say that Twitter is like evil and suppressing speech are probably going to say that anyway. So having a really, really clearly informed set of standards is something that like, you know, it worked. It did allow them to do the move that they wanted to do, but I'm curious about sort of the extent to which a letter of the law approach is oftentimes just a way to masquerade a more spirit of the law approach or a way to justify things that you were already intending to do in the first place.
Oh man, such a so smart. I have a paper on on something related to this that I've been writing for a long time, and it looks at how platforms use metaphors of governmentality. And I wrote about it a little bit in the context moderation piece, but you see it across all of these companies. So they'll often use metaphors. They'll use kind of legal and governmental metaphors when they're describing the work that they do. So Reddit refers to itself as a federal system. Medium and Patreon often refers to using, common law, a common law approach. Facebook will refer to its process as a mini legislature. And I think that you're exactly right, Zach, that there is a real gesture towards procedural justice that these companies are making, where there is a belief, and it's a belief that's founded on research because Tom Tyler, who is the coiner of the term procedural justice, has done research for and funded by Facebook on this very topic, that looks at how users perceive the fairness of rules and how much importance that they put into fairness as a concept within content moderation. What I actually found very interesting, though, is that for most of these companies, emphasizing fairness has another aim. So when you're looking at the big industrial companies that really want to figure out how to apply their rules very statically across settings, they are doing that, not just so they can say to a user, we apply this fairly, we applied it to the letter of our, quote unquote law, but they're doing this because they're really trying to scale up moderation very, very widely. They're trying to train a lot of workers that are turning over very, very quickly, and they're trying to automate. They're really trying to build these rules towards, the eventual goal of automation. But it's funny because when you talk to platforms, when you talk to people within trust and safety, they really don't think it's actually that important. That they emphasize that you really need to think about the context of almost every single decision that you're making, and when you try and moderate content divorced from that context, you really get into some pretty big thorny issues and problems.
Can I just jump in real fast?
Oh, sure, yes. Yeah. I
Okay.
muted right when I said, oh, sure.
I think one of the things that came up for me is, I think when we think about the letter of the law, just like Zach and Robin have been talking about, there's this impression of consistency, but I think it's helpful to actually kind of push back against that. I think what it really is kind of like a facade of consistency that companies can kind of fall back on maybe this is spicy, as an excuse. I think a lot of times there's this great book by Patricia Ewick and Susan Silby called The Commonplace of Law. It has nothing to do with online communities, but everything to do with how governance happens in practice. And basically the gist of it is that, there's always going to be a gap between the rules that as they were written, as they're actually practiced. And so I think even in the context of online communities, we might think of something as being consistently enforced through a algorithm or something, but there's always going to be something different, some kind of distance from what was written. And so the letter of the law, I think, is something that conveys a sense of consistency to people, but I think in reality it never really plays out that way.
I'll add a couple of pieces briefly, kind of just directly building off of that. I guess it's quite a moderation joke, a moderation research joke, but there's a look in a book called, actually I don't remember the name. It's by Janet Sternberg. It's I'll look it up, but she points out that we sort of often think of the way rules working as rules are made, rules are broken, rules are enforced, but actually the rules are broken, then they're enforced, then they're written. Yes, that's the one, misbehavior in cyberplaces. So really, I think I agree to some extent that letter of the law doesn't quite exist. It exists in this very nice place in time and space where the letter of the law works, and then that works for a while, and then it doesn't. So I guess, yeah, I think letter of the law is more of a temporal, spatial situation than a strategy. That was a weird way to put it. But yeah, it's interesting to think about that term and that metaphor. And I am 100% a fan of metaphors and moderation. I guess I'll self-pub. Also, I have a paper called, I think it's called Metaphors and Moderation. And I really love the approach of taking metaphors to this domain. Lots of other folks have used metaphors. Tarleton Gillespie and Kay Klonick and Robin also quite a lot. So yes, 100% metaphors.
I love that paper, Joseph.
Oh, thank you.
Great paper.
I'm super excited to hear that.
I actually also want to note, because one thing that has really made me kind of laugh in thinking about how platforms do this and why they're gesturing to certain institutions at particular times is that, platforms gesturing towards government during a period where, we're seeing that people, seem to have a lot of distrust in institutions is very interesting and kind of like slightly absurd. So it's very interesting to kind of, because they're also, seeing waning trust. But it's interesting to follow the institutions that they are trying to kind of glom themselves onto, that they're trying to borrow legitimacy from, that are also in flux right now.
I just want to say thank you, Trans, for the original question, and also thank you, everyone, audience and panelists combined. I want to take this time to give a round of applause for our panelists because they did so much of this hour for us. We are so happy to have you here. I personally have to say, as an aspiring content moderation scholar, I admire every single one of you, and you all are great people. So thank you so much for talking with us today. And I want to tell people that the questions that we missed, we will be reposting those in chat. Feel free to chat with each other, chat with the panelists if they're available. And thank you, everyone, for such a wonderful first Bonfire chat. It's been wonderful. Any last thoughts from the panelists before we go?
Just thank you so much.
Just thanks.
Yeah, this was a ton of fun. Thanks for having us.
Delightful.
I'm glad. It was a delight on my side, too. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you in the chat and elsewhere.